Welcome to Point Blank, brought to you by Fitz Roofing. I'm Brandon Strange, and I'm joined by ESPN Houston's Joel Blank of the Press Box. Joel, welcome in. I want to talk some Astros free agency with you. One of the big mysteries since Justin Verlander's injury has been the question of whether or not the Astros have insurance on Justin Verlander's salary. Back in September, Chandler Rome from the Chronicle reported that the Astros GM James Click would not confirm whether or not the salary was insured or not. And it's a big question because the Astros would like to have back either Springer or Brantley. But like other teams, they're going to look to be as frugal as possible because of the economic impacts of COVID. So now, in looking at this, there's one scenario in which the Astros either don't have insurance on a 37-year-old pitcher who's due $33 million next year. And another scenario is that the Astros just don't want to confirm the existence of the insurance policy. So if one of their star players does walk, the fans don't get mad at the team for crying poor when the fans actually know they're off the hook for the majority of this contract. So, Joel, I'm just going to ask you, in your opinion, what's your take on this?
I think that you're touching on it, Brandon. I think, look, here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with being savvy enough and admitting it publicly to know that you got insurance for a guy longer in the tooth in years at a very high salary rate to make sure your butt was covered. That's a good look for most franchises. It's a bad look if when you use it as an excuse for the fact that you had to pay Verlander and he was on your books and you had to pay Greinke one more year at an exorbitant amount of money, and that's why it prevented you from keeping Michael Brantley and George Springer when the fans show outrage if one or both walk out the door and that crutch is taken away. They want built-in excuses right now. They know that the pandemic isn't going away just yet, and so therefore there's more uncertainty in terms of the finances. Will there be butts in the seats? Will there be all these different revenue streams, or will they have to endure another season of losses? If that's the case, they don't want to be the owner and the team that has to admit, yeah, we're just sucking it up and we're trying to cut money and costs across the board because we're just bleeding money. And that's not a good look for a sports franchise, especially in one of the top 4 biggest cities in the United States. That's not going to fly. It's not going to fly with the fan base. It's not going to fly with the sport. It's going to be where they're going to get picked apart. So I think more so than anything else, you're onto it when I say that I believe they're just trying to make sure that the fans don't know, so that there can be the built-in crutch of, well, the reason why we couldn't bring George back was at that price when we already had 70-some million on the books with all the contracts we were paying of guys that weren't going to be playing or weren't near what they really were, used to be potential-wise. I think that's why they did it.
I think that makes sense. I just find it strange that they would not want to admit kind of the economic situation, considering other teams have kind of come out and said, including the Yankees, have kind of come out and said, hey, the salary is what the salary is. And, we suffered from this, economic standstill like every other business in America did. And we're trying to, recover from it and come out on the other side a viable platform. Joel, I want to ask you about a third possible scenario in this. But before I do that, why don't you give us a word from Fitz Roofing?
We love Fitz Roofing. They've been very supportive of us here at SportsMap, but they're also supportive of the people of Houston. Therefore, they're going to do free, no obligation inspections if you have any need for a roofing, whether it be a leaky roof or a new roof on your business or your home. All you got to do is pick up the phone and call. It's 832-521-3001. They come to you and tell you what they can do for free, and then they go back doing their work. You want them to come back. They're going to do fantastic work with the best products and the best warranties and the best ratings in the business. It's Fitz Roofing, making a difference one home at a time.
Joel, I'm going to admittedly make a reach here, but there is also an outside possibility that perhaps Justin Verlander could be healthy enough to pitch by the end of next season. One could assume that in that situation, Verlander would definitely not be looking to retire. He'd probably want to get out there and pitch so that way he has some value on the open market at his age, because I guess he'll be 38 by that time. So he'd want to be out there pitching, and that puts the Astros in a tough spot, right? Because you want to appease Verlander, you want to try to win now, but depending on the standings and where they're at, they may also want to rather cash in on that insurance policy. So what kind of situation would that play out, and do you buy into that scenario at all?
Well, the only reason why I would buy into it, if there's a buyout, which means that in exchange for Justin Verlander understanding that they need him to not pitch so that they can get paid, he's going to want to get paid even more along the way. I think that's the only way it makes sense. Otherwise, for Verlander, I believe in exactly what you were saying, Brandon. I think he still wants to pitch. And if he has a way to put something on his resume before he becomes a free agent so that more teams are attracted to him, he's going to do it. And he doesn't care what the team's goals are and what their objectives are. He's going to do what's best for him. And from an Astros perspective, if you want him to pitch at all, or if you would even want him to be a part of your late season push, it would probably be because you're in a playoff situation where you're either trying to win the division or get into the playoffs. And therefore, you have to be good enough. In order to be good enough, you can't afford to let two big pieces of the middle of your lineup walk away like George Springer and Michael Brantley. So I think that it's going to be a very tough call for the Astros. I think that they've got a lot of tough decisions. As we've talked about in the past, James Click has yet to put his stamp on this franchise. The last thing you want it to be is negatives because he was the general manager in charge when you let Springer walk away, when you let Brantley go, when you didn't want to get into a Justin Verlander situation with insurance and pitching versus non-pitching. Those are all bad looks for a franchise that have had their share and more of bad looks recently and don't need any more.
Verlanders do $33 million next season, and if what we're hearing is correct, that insurance would cover 80% of that, then they're looking at being basically reimbursed for $26.5 million, 26.4. So let's let you play GM. If the Astros are going to prioritize some of the, spreading around some of the salary, Charlie Morton's out there on the market right now too. Would you rather see them spend their money on offense, pitching, or maybe a mixture of both?
Here's my thing, Brandon. I've said all along, I've been adamant about this, and I will never get off this horse, which is George Springer needs to come back to the Houston Astros. I thought because of the playoff performance, he was going to push. They were talking Mookie Betts numbers, but it was going to be 27 and above. Now, every article that I've read said the max could be 5 years at an average of $24 million a year. If Jim Crane can't come and open up the wallet and say that's good enough for me, and we'll do it right now, maybe he's not worth a fifth year. But guess what? You held him back long enough that you owe that to him, and because he's not breaking the bank, Bregman's making 20, so 24 for Springer should be no big deal. You can replace a Michael Brantley, and you're getting Yordan Alvarez back, but I don't think you can replace George Springer, and I think he needs to finish the legacy of George Springer as a Houston Astro and all the positives he's brought to this franchise. He's marketable, he's sellable, he's lovable, he's part of Houston's fabric, and I think he needs to be back with the Astros. If you can get Brantley back too, that's fine. But I also think the key is to be forward thinking because of the fact that you're going to get Verlander's money off the books after a year. You're going to get Greinke's money off the books after a year. You're going to get Osuna's money off the books already before this year even starts. So long term, you're going to have plenty of money that you're going to be saving that you can now use to spend to keep a guy like George Springer and still have enough. I think it's a smart move to bring Charlie Morton back because as good as your young pitching is and how much it's going to be cost effective, both bullpen and starting rotation, what we saw last year, you need one or two stable veterans. The Rangers let Corey Kluber go. You can probably get him on the cheap for a team that's going to win. I think Charlie Morton would love the fact to come back to Houston where it's not the media circus, but he knows the situation and he'll feel comfortable here. And I think he's a guy. Brad Hand is another guy the Astros have pursued in the past. An above-average left-handed reliever out of the bullpen that'll cost you less than $10 million a year that makes you forget about Osuna. I think that if I've got the general manager hat on, I think there's a way to keep Springer, to get some other pieces in here, and to keep this team relevant as a championship contender in the next 2 to 3 years.